All right, welcome to the August Toronto Perl Mongers meeting. Just a little preliminary hit before we get started because I've been harassing everyone at my workplace. Next month is the fabulous September Lightning Talks. Anyone interested in giving a talk, like Justin, who's backing away from me very quickly, just has to be related to anything the tech community might be interested in. It doesn't have to be Perl. It doesn't even have to be code. Volunteers welcome. You don't have to know your subject now. It only has to be 5 minutes, and my goal this year is to get the most speakers we have ever had, because I'm harassing everyone here relentlessly.
What's the number?
Right now, we're at 7 confirmed, and I have about 4.
But how many to beat the record?
I think the most we ever had was about 11. So, and I mean, really, the talks are quick. So I'm hoping we can bang out a whole bunch of them. So first up, we're going to have Matt Phillips talk about his contributions to CPAN. What itches did he scratch? Nope, you first. Mine second.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to apologize in advance because I found out I'm moving to New York in like 2 weeks, so I didn't really have time to prepare anything. I'm still going to go through essentially just pretty much all the open source work that I've done in the past, I guess we can sort these by date, since 2011. That's when I started putting things on CPAN. Essentially, whenever I try to put things on CPAN, I'm looking to scratch an itch or solve a problem. A lot of these I've actually done at work, either at my work at Rayback or at Wanda, and I've just happened to actually leverage, or actually been able to convert it into open source that someone else could actually use. And a lot of my modules, some of them are useful, some of them not so much. I'll kind of go through some of the interesting ones. I guess I don't have that much, I can just go one by one. So Plaque Middleware PJAX is just a conversion of Ruby's PJAX middleware. What that is essentially, let me just find an example. So it's essentially middleware that sits between your actual application that's serving up a full HTML page. And what it does is it actually converts the full HTML get into an AJAX request and then inserts that into a predefined tag in your HTML body. Oh, that's over here. And the way that works is essentially Plaque middleware that sits after the response, the HTML response, looks for a predefined tag, looks for what's actually being responded, and then it returns just that snippet as opposed to the full HTML request. If we actually look at the module sorts, that's essentially what it's doing with MARPA, which is an HTML parser. I cannot use Max. How do you middle click with Max again?
Either command or option click, or you click down here.
Oh, okay. Anyway, let me just make the font a little bigger. Yeah, it's essentially just something that's sitting in between the request and the response. It's doing essentially what I was talking about. That's not very exciting, so let's move on to something more interesting that I've done. Yeah.
It's essentially an authorized management.
Yep, kind of. But there's something else that I'm a maintainer of called CRSF block, which is another Plaque middleware that actually helps stop man-in-the-middle attacks. It's actually a very similar concept. See, I didn't write this. I actually just became a maintainer of it to fix bugs because the original maintainer, or the original author, wasn't really doing a whole lot with it. Yeah, it essentially just inserts an actual secret value into the form. In a similar fashion, it parses the actual response, HTML response, inserts that in, and then ensures that it's actually there when you're actually doing a post. And that protects against man-in-the-middle attacks. Yeah. Or cross-site scripting, sorry. Yeah, not man-in-the-middle. Yeah.
Cross-site request forwarding.
What's that?
Cross-site request forwarding, right?
Yeah. I'm actually probably not even... Would you be able to do a better explanation than I? Because I can't really explain. Yeah.
Sure.
Not to throw you under the bus there, Doug, but I do a really bad job.
closer.
Yeah, over to the mic. Cross-site request forgery is just when a malicious, like an attacker, forces you to make a request to your site that you're logged in as, for example, right? Like, let's say you're surfing, evil hacker, evilnews.com or something, a site you don't trust, and you also happen to be logged into your bank, right? One thing they could do is make it so when you click somewhere on your evil news site, it would send, it would be basically a form that posts to your bank, right? And let's say your bank has an endpoint like withdrawal money to Cayman Islands bank account, then if the bank just honored that request, well, it could take the malicious data from the attacker that was crafted by the evil news site, right? So the way the CSRF tokens prevent that is they make sure that you can't do those sort of blind posts, right? You need to actually load a document, process something, and get this token, and then include that in the post, right? So because CSRF attacks are purely blind, right? Like evil news site can't do a get from your perspective of your browser and then a post, right? You can only do the post.
Yeah, thank you, Dick. As I said, I didn't actually write this module. I just fixed some bugs with it and then became the maintainer, so I'm not too familiar with it. Moving on. So this example here, I can actually show you a demonstration. This is a problem I solved at Owanda. In particular, it's a problem with DB2 and DB2's Perl bindings. Oops. Wrong browser. Sorry. Go to the terminal.
Oh, terminal?
Yeah. Thank you. So if we look at this here, this command, it's essentially a one-liner that's sourcing the DB2 profile. That's just DB2 setup. And it's using Perl to connect to the database and select a user row from our user table, essentially. If we run this here, and it's also using devel peek to look at the actual Perl internal representation of that row that gets returned. And if we look at what this does, even though we actually even though we have the locale set to UTF-8, which I think does something with DB2 for returning UTF-8 strings, it still doesn't actually return a UTF-8 string. It just returns a binary string. As you can see here, I've in the one-liner I'm doing UTF-8 upgrade, and that's what the actual UTF-8 upgraded string should look like. So yeah, the problem with this is if you ever actually need to do any operations on any data that you get pulled back from the database, you're going to be operating on bytes and not on actual UTF-8 characters, which can be multiple bytes. Thank you. So essentially there was no real way to do this at the database driver level, which is the DB2 DBD, which is kind of dumb because you can actually do that with pretty much every other database driver that I've looked at. So it's kind of a deficiency in DB2's Perl bindings, but I kind of worked around it by writing this DBX class component that is built on top of filter column by type, or it's built on top of filter column, sorry, and it lets you specify an actual data type that you'd like to use filter column with. In particular, for our problem, we wanted to obviously apply a specific filter for varchars, text, anything that could potentially be UTF-8 string. And in our situation, we assume that everything is UTF-8 in our database, so we can just blindly apply this. And this example here is pretty much what we're doing in our code base at Owanda right now, which is just converting everything to UTF-8, so it's not actually causing any problems. Yeah.
So in that case, it wasn't an option just to patch the driver?
I'm sure it could have been an option, but that's like C-level access bindings, binding to the actual DB2 core stuff, and I have absolutely no idea how to do that, so kind of outside of my wheelhouse, so to speak.
Plus, the module can be useful for a bunch of other purposes in theory too.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. I guess I won't actually go into the source for all this stuff. It's not really interesting for you guys. So let's see what else I got. So Selenium, test WW Selenium is actually just another thing that I've got pulled into being a maintainer for. Just the same reason I was fixing bugs, getting the test suite passing again. I didn't do too much outside of that. So MUX handles via and data Perl are actually two connected things that I worked on probably like last year or 6 months ago or something like that. Essentially, what it is have you guys heard of Moo before? Hands up. Yeah. Okay. It's essentially like a pure Perl reimplementation of Moose with some minor differences. And one of the more major differences is that it doesn't actually implement any of the what are they called? Just the handles functionality. I'm just drawing a blank right now. So essentially what it does is it lets you delegate methods to Perl's built-in data types. For example, if we look at the data Perl hash class, it's going to have the things that you would expect it to have, like push. Actually, no, this is the array. That's kind of okay. I should open a bug here because that should be there. That's actually for array, not hash. But like, if you look at this here, I think there actually is a bug open for that I should fix. Yeah. So yeah, if we see all the expected methods that you expect to see, like get, set, delete, keys, exist, blah blah blah. So this is I'll just show you guys the source because it actually is pretty simple. It's essentially just a simple base class built on top of these methods, kind of just recreating what the core functionality. So what MooX handles via does is it lets you map those to actual attribute methods that you declare with the handles declaration.
So this is traits, essentially?
Exactly. Native traits is the term that I blanked on there. So yeah, it's essentially a reimplementation of that. Yeah, and the reason I actually did that was because I was trying to port another Perl module. Do you use DuckDuckGo? Yes, you do. Okay. Walrus client. So back when Moo was actually pretty new on the scene, there was a big push to convert a lot of the Moose-based modules to Moo on CPAN. The reason for that being it would just, since Moo has the capability of upgrading to Moose on the fly, it makes sense for CPAN modules to be Moo-based instead of Moose-based if possible, because then it lets people not have to actually bring in the entire Moose dependency chain. Yeah, so there was a big push for a while to actually convert a lot of common popular modules on CPAN to Moo from Moose, and one that I wanted to use at Wanda was Roll-Rest Client. And even though this actual example here is using Moose in the example, if you look on the dependencies here, it's actually using Moo and MooX handles via. So when I first wanted to port this, I noticed that it was actually using Moose's native traits functionality. And I obviously realized that Moo didn't have that, so I essentially went down the rabbit hole, looked into what would actually be needed to implement native traits with Moo, and then provide some kind of stopgap solution. And then I guess like a month later or so, I was able to crank that out and then port Roll-Rest Client, and then get that on CPAN, and then use it for Wanda. So yeah, that was probably one of the bigger things I've done or contributed to CPAN. Let's see what else I have. Actually, you guys might actually find this useful. If anyone's doing Perl web development and you've gotten used to the Catalyst debugging output, which looks kind of like this. So for probably a year and a half or so, I was working with Catalyst, and I got pretty accustomed to seeing this and using it to actually debug stuff. Then I moved at Wanda to starting to use Dancer, and the built-in logging is really not quite as good. It doesn't provide any of this information, and you kind of end up, at least when I was doing Dancer development, just sticking in like data dumper or data printer statements when I wanted to see what was going on with like the params that are getting passed in, or the headers. It's just really like turned into being really messy and not very nice. And then I kind of just thought, why don't I actually pull that out of Catalyst and turn that into middleware? That code doesn't really have anything at all to do with Catalyst itself. It's probably a few months ago I did this. I just ripped that out and then provided it as middleware. And yeah, at least I was working on it during YAMC. I can't remember if it started before that or not. But yeah, right around YAMC is when I was working on this. Yeah, and it's actually pretty useful, especially if you're using something that isn't Catalyst, since it's obviously a redundant functionality, but provides some pretty handy information. So if you guys are Catalyst fans and want to use that somewhere else, you should check this out. I actually added one functionality, or one piece of functionality that Catalyst doesn't have, which it actually attempts to, so if you post like JSON or XML or anything like that, it'll attempt to deserialize it and then print the deserialized request and request parameters. That's one thing Catalyst won't do, so it does have a slight edge on top of that. Let's see what else I got. And the one other big thing that I worked on while I was at Awanda was Dancer plugin resource. So I kind of created this because I didn't really like Dancer's declarative get blah or slash blah and then attach like a code ref or a sub to it. I didn't really like the way apps ended up getting laid out in that fashion when people essentially got used to working with Dancer. I found it tended to make code very cluttery. So I looked at what other frameworks were doing, in particular Catalyst Action REST and Ruby on Rails. I kind of borrowed some ideas from them. And essentially what I created was a thing called Dancer plugin resource. That's essentially kind of sugar around the way that routes get generated with Dancer. So you essentially declare things called resources, which is what you'd expect it to be, like a RESTful resource. So in this example here, we're declaring a resource user. And then what it does is it actually checks the namespace for subroutines that map to the singular and plural of the HTTP verbs, and then maps the equivalent routes to those essentially subroutines. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I found it actually kept code fairly clean. It was definitely an improvement over what we were doing before. For the Awanda folks in the room, for the white label API, that's the main thing that are using it. Yeah, there's some other cool ideas like, let's see if I can show you guys. So you can actually post load and load all subroutines. So for example, if you're getting like a user singular route and you have like a user ID, you can actually pass it, attach like a loading, like say you want to load the actual user from the database and have that for all of the singular routes. So what you can do is provide something like this. That'll pass it in, and then you'll actually get it as an argument to the routine. And then you'll be able to do that. You kind of just are able to forget that you're actually dealing with like a web application. You kind of just treat it more as just like a business model kind of thing. So not necessarily groundbreaking stuff, but I found it useful for keeping code organized. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I know there's a bit of me rambling, but yeah, all these other, actually there's one other thing, kind of cool. You guys might find this useful. So when I was working on DBX class, I was actually running I was doing a bit of core development for DBX class, and that involved a lot of running of the test suite and looking at what was happening inside DBX class internals. And sometimes I'd want to actually inspect what was happening, say, in a really hot code path where it's getting run like 10,000 times and dumping like these huge data structures. So when you're running like an entire test, there's going to be a lot of noise if you just insert a data dumper or a data printer somewhere inside your code. Like when it's running all the other tests that aren't part of the test that you're thinking about. So I wrote something called data printer scoped that essentially just turns on and off the actual outputting of data printer for, say, only that one specific part of the test that you're working on that you care about the output of data printer. Yeah, that's pretty much all it is. If you look at the code, it's actually fairly simple. So I'm surprised there's like not some other idea that was stealing it or doing something. There might actually be something on CPAN that does this. But yeah, it just looks if the enabled flag is set, lets the original subroutine run. If it is, otherwise, just make it a no operation. Yeah, and if you found yourself in a similar situation, you could probably do something like this. You might find it useful. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the things that I've done that are useful that other people can use. I don't know if you want to take it from here, Dave. Yeah. What was all this crap? Thank you, Matt.
And a round of applause for Matt, who is leaving us for New York. Jerk. And I have one less person to harass for talks. Okay, so how do you do this? Woo! So, did anyone here hear about CPANday? I knew you two would. CPANday, I believe, was Neil Boers, was it not? Yeah. Basically, this was the first recognition of the anniversary of CPAN. This past August 16th was the 19th birthday of CPAN as we know it. Well, maybe not completely as we know it, but the first upload to CPAN. So for anyone that doesn't know, CPAN is the Comprehensive Perl Archive Network. It is where all of our lovely modules are stored, and pretty much all the services around distributing modules are built, including the lovely Meta CPAN. So the first upload was on August 16th, 1995 by Andreas Koenig, who ended up developing PAWS, and he uploaded SimDump 1.2. Now we had never previously, people distributed code, but there was no central way of doing it. And I'm just going to go to this. This is kind of basic stuff, but when I first started doing Perl, this confused the ever-living crap out of me. Packages, modules, and distributions. I didn't understand the distinction. So a package is really just a namespace for isolating your code. If you're doing an OO type of module, it becomes your class name, but a package is not necessarily a class. A module is the .pm file that you import with use or require. So if we put the previous stuff inside whatever.pm, you would then just use whatever, and you could then call the connect. So there is a disconnect here. Use is using the convention of the file name. It is looking in the library paths for whatever.pm. If your package inside there says something else, that's what you're actually getting. So don't do this, because it's horrible and ugly.
You can also put multiple packages in one.
You can, which is also horrible, although there are specific instances, you know, little tiny helper classes and so on and so forth. A lot of the Moosey stuff does it, some Catalyst stuff does it. So, and a distribution is just a collection of files. This is what you are uploading to CPAN. It's tar-gzipped usually, although if you actually look at what's on CPAN, you'll find all kinds of fun little archive formats that you may not have heard of. Some very classic ones, LHZ or LZH or whatever it is, that I haven't used since my BBS days. So usually you have at least one module and a collection of related files, but at its very minimum, it's a module. And of course, it has the lib folder, the T folder for tests, the metal YAML and metal JSON that describe the author and information about the release, the manifest that lists it all, the build file, which is either makefile.pl or build.pl, and a list of changes among all kinds of things. Now, what's in a distribution has been changing over time, and it's really about how the Perl community has evolved their own standards. CPAN doesn't need much to index a module. It just needs a module that it can find and figure out the namespace of. So, the idea behind CPANday was everyone upload something to CPAN. As many people as we could get, they wanted to upload either something they'd already, you know, update a module that they already had, or upload something new, but this is, we want to celebrate CPAN, let's put stuff online. I
said you tried to organize it details.
Essentially. Apparently, PAWS held up very well under the strain. So the results were basically, there were 107 participants. There were 774 distributions released. There were 41 brand new distributions, and 10 of those were by new contributors. One that I found very quickly interesting was a web service called Jotform. Now, this is not interesting in and of itself. There's a whole bunch of web service modules that wrap some kind of thing to various APIs. In this case, Jotform's APIs. What I found interesting was this. Anyone know who Tim Vroom is? Tim Vroom is the creator of a little community called Perl Monks. And this is, in fact, his very first module ever released to CPAN. I thought that was actually pretty cool. And good God, is my connection gone. Olaf, Meta CPAN is busted. What's taking so long? Okay. Anyway, this said, if any of you were tracking this event, Ingy.net, you might know as one of the creators of YAML, blew this one out of the damn water. 316 distributions in one day. He claimed 317, but he was 1 second over the line. He was asked to do a 21-gun salute. He did that in the first minute of CPANday. He wrote up a very interesting talk, a very interesting blog post on what he did, why he did it, just for fun. He did multiple releases of some things, in particular his Zilla dist, which, of course, if you know anything about Ingy, Meta doesn't begin to describe him. So he uses Zilla dist to generate distzilla and other release packages. It's actually an agnostic way of packaging, so we can package in multiple languages using Zilla dist, is how I recall reading about it. But don't mess with Ingy. So Ingy did 316 packages, but as you can see, other people were far from inactive. Etheridge, you probably know a whole bunch of the modules if you don't know the names. So I just picked out some of the new ones, not re-releases. There were some interesting ones, to be sure, in already existing distributions. People did full releases. One I noted was Dancer released a new full... Dancer 2 released, or was it Dancer or Dancer 2? Basically, they did a release called Looney Pandora, which was named in honor of a UK developer that actually tragically passed away because of a car accident. 2 months after the accident due to complications. He was a contributor to Dancer, and they thought this would be a nice way to memorialize him, which I thought was pretty cool. One thing I saw was Event Distributor, which is basically pub-sub within a single process. The basic, and I'm sure someone here will very quickly correct me if I say this wrong, the idea between pub-sub is you basically create announcement paths and, publishing and listening. So you declare a particular channel or signal, however you want to call it, and messages are sent over that. And other pieces of code declare listeners, which will act when they see the message. So the sender just throws it out there and doesn't care who hears it. But the ones that are listening will act on them. So in this case, what you're seeing here is you create a new event distributor and you declare a signal, announce. And then this also is declaring 2 listeners. A synchronous listener, which means when the announce event is fired, it will perform this action, but it will do it in a blocking way. This code will block until it has finished all the code inside the subroutine. Another one is asynchronous. In this case, it is taking the message and it's posting it to another URL, but it's immediately returning. The idea here, if you're familiar with JavaScript promises, the idea being is it consumes and returns quickly, and it doesn't matter. It acts when it needs to, when it gets the message, and it just releases the message, and you don't worry about the rest of it. And at the bottom here, you see it fires. This is how you fire a message over a particular channel or signal. I thought this was kind of nifty because there's certainly all kinds of pub-sub stuff out there. This is something you could use in a very simple way to do asynchronous programming in Perl by passing this around. I have no idea why I can't seem to get to anything right now.
That's your Wi-Fi already parallel distributed system.
Hmm.
Where it has
Are we still online?
Is
No.
it just in a CPAN slow?
Seems to be. Oh, wait. Old CPAN. What is it? Event distributor. Yeah, it's just Meta CPAN. Fortunately, we have Olaf here who will get that all fixed up for us. So I just thought that was an entertaining, quick little way to do PubSub or to do a proof of concept with PubSub. I don't know how seriously you could do it. Hmm? Oh, yes, which this was written by Paul Evans, who wrote Future, yes. So what else did I see? I also saw a whole bunch of interesting little things, because I know we've done this internally at, oh,
I'll restart.
God. So, no matches. All right. Basically, these were a bunch of command line tools that you in the, what is it, OCB web sprite and OCB CSS3. Just some command line utilities you can use to generate web sprite sheets. So if you have CSS that's putting in a whole bunch of images, it'll combine the images for you and rewrite the CSS to use the sprite sheet, which is something I know a lot of companies have done to optimize their web experience. And they've got two CSS, an analyzer and a post-processor. So BlessC will look at your CSS, or CSS-lint looks for limitations in Internet Explorer. If you do something in your CSS that Internet Explorer would fuck up, pardon me, screw up, this is out on the web live, it will give you warnings, and BlessC will actually try and work around them for you. I don't know all the details of it, but I thought it was just fun that someone threw that out there. Text chart, which I thought was really cute, a very simple solution for output. Basically, given simple data sets, you can generate quick little text charts in a few formats. There we go. I thought for a command line utility of some kind, this is a very nifty, quick way to generate very simple graphs and charts. It can even do Sparkline, really.
Texting Spotlight. Genius.
Interesting. I think that's not quite done.
No, that's
Many
not
features
done.
not implemented. Yes.
Awesome job.
Mm-hmm. SysMI. This is the core module of Bounce Hammer, which is basically an analytics tool to, it'll look at your email and determine why certain things were bounced. Very useful for marketing campaigns that any number of places do. Granted, a lot of other, a lot of companies, when you send through, campaign monitor and so on and so forth, they do this for you, but it's cool to have the ability to do it yourself. Yeah. So it actually parses the messages and looks for...
That's actually a hilarious sticker problem.
It is. Anything to do with email is evil, and I don't envy them. Table data object is just a very simple way to manipulate tables. Generate tables with simple arrays or arrays of arrays, and look at the columns, set, get, manipulate. Very simple concept, but I thought a fun thing to do. Test skeleton generator was, I thought, was kind of nifty as well. When you write tests, you end up writing a lot of boilerplate, so this will do it for you. You tell it the module you want it to look at. You can tell it to skip private methods if you want, and it'll generate skeleton tests for everything and all of your all of the methods in the class and so on and so forth. You can build your mocks from there, but it gets rid of all the boilerplate and it makes sure you don't forget something.
Are you able to tell it
what if you consider a part of it?
Well, it means underscore methods, underscore leaving methods. All of the stuff I used to find all of these modules and look up what was done, I did with the Meta CPAN API. This is the query I use, so basically you can nab all of this by doing a range over the date. I just grabbed all of this stuff. I had a lot of fun messing around with this, and every time I broke the API, it irritated me, but I got to it. So this generated me the full list of 775 distributions. It's actually a rather entertaining thing to look at, where you can actually look in a 24-hour period at what was released, who did it, and certainly CPANday was one of the more interesting ones.
You can also go to /recent, I think, too, right?
Recent is like the last 100, but this is like looking in the past, because I was like, I was looking for specific ones, so I could look through and do that. I had a little, what did I do there? Oh, that's not there. In the spirit of what Matt was doing there, I am going to, I did not release anything on CPANday, and in fact I have only ever, despite having worked in Perl for 14 years now, I had never released a CPAN module until this year. I wrote a web wrapper for an API that we do at work here. The itch that's scratched is they paid me. And actually, I've played with writing wrappers for APIs before, and this was a pretty simple thing. I wrote it using Moo.
You need to see your source code.
You can see my source code. Yeah, this is all open source and on CPAN.
Your comments.
None. No comments at all. It's very simple. Yeah, this was written very quickly. Yeah, basically it's just a Moo class, and it's using LWP user agent under the hood. I actually wanted to switch it to use HTTP Tiny for fun, because I've never played with HTTP Tiny. It supports accessing via proxy. You can. There are multiple ways of hitting the API depending on what you want to do. If you want to use a static IP, if you don't want to use the secure URL for some reason beyond my comprehension. You have to have a user account, which you can sign up for free on www.oanda.com. Let's see, I used Type Tiny to do some validation of the input, which was probably overkill, to make sure that currency codes are uppercase 3-character things, and the quote currencies are just array ref of currencies. The date format is solidified. What fields you're doing, or it's just an array of strings, and so on and so forth. The authentication is done via an authorization header, where it just adds the API key for you, so it's just set on the LWP user agent object when it's generated, so you don't even have to worry about it. Once you tell, it just handles it under the hood for you. These are the endpoints: currencies, rates, and remaining quotes, and they all go through this get request method. And they all return a result object, which, or a response object, which automatically deserializes the response for you, and also some simple manipulations. So it proxies some things through to the actual LWP user agent, so you can just check is the result is a success, is an error. You can look at the raw data if you want, and you can view the HTTP status code. Yeah, and this is just the automatic deserialization. So it was actually kind of fun. It was actually a little bit harder. One thing I thought was fun about this, actually, I'm not very good at mocking, and I know very little about mocking. So I use module spy, because in my last job I was using Angular, and we were using Karma and Jasmine for testing, and they have this concept of a spy. So what I would do is I set up a I set a SPY on the user agent object, and so I took over the get function. You can certainly use test mock object to do this sort of thing, but I like this way of defining a mock. I find it very simple and clean and clear to me, so I could take over get and check and see, that I got the response I expected.
What's that?
That was at the instance level. Yeah,
Okay, that's what I'm saying. How's that work?
it's just digging into the internals and wrapping itself around the original subroutine. Essentially. But I mean, you can give it a fully functional object and just take over a single routine or multiple routines. Instead of building a full mock, I wanted it to just don't actually go get something from the internet, just return this response for me.
It's not possible.
It's absolutely possible.
I'm sure the module works. I'm just saying
I don't think so.
You can construct classes on yourself.
Okay, so it creates a new class.
I think that would be one way.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah, so it's wrapping. Oh, it'll do it to a class too.
Okay, so it's crazy.
Yeah.
And the other way, yeah, you know the ones. It's the to forward methods that you don't know.
Hi, guys. What have you done? So I did notice, I had trouble because there was a person here that has 2 pause accounts. One had nothing, and I thought, no, I don't believe that this gentleman has no modules.
It's actually true that there's 2, but there's no way that nobody seems to be able to trace anything about the other one to enable them to give it back to me.
I ran into that when I was searching for your pause ID. I saw your email saying.
Nobody seems to be able to give it back.
But could I perhaps convince Mr. Watt, Mr. Alders, or Mr. Hoyt to come up here?
Sure.
To talk? You don't have to give a full talk, but I thought, in light of CPANday, what have you contributed to CPAN? Some more than others, some crazier than others. Some look, well, basically, y'all look smarter than me, so why don't you impress me for a minute? Any takers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, you can stay. I'll go through.
You can drive. You can drive.
I can kneel. So first we have is a C-based routine for the Adler 32 digest. This is really, I was having the problem of trying to compare the difference between extremely large files. And the lines were quite long, so rather than actually compare the whole line string by string, it was actually easier to turn each line into a 32-bit digest fast, and then compare integers, because all we were really caring about were mismatches. So that was just a C-based routine for quickly doing a hash on a line. It's a fairly old hashing function, but it works pretty well for basic strings, and it's fast. Test uses was a test helper module which just adds in a test to see whether a module uses another module or not. And that was really there as a catcher for when code wasn't actually including dependencies properly. Config.ant was handy when I was working on Catalyst. I needed to get XML-style config files that were actually portable and readable by Perl, so I built a config.ant which would enable me to take the same config files and use them between 2 components. Data binary is probably the most recent. I just quickly put that in there. Although there's a test predicate that you can use to kind of just determine whether or not a file matches, it was actually handy to have one that would work on a buffer rather than on just the file name. So data binary basically takes that core logic from Perl and just allows you to apply it to the first block of data that you've actually read from a file and quickly make a heuristic determination. And text extract word just has about 3 methods that you can put in an old style .doc Word file. And this is by far the most complicated. Because it actually, this will take me back. Lib, text, extract, Word. It originated in Java code and was actually ported from Java code to try and basically extract the streams that were within the layers. So you can see it's doing a lot of low-level byte manipulation, trying to hack things. And I was using the smart comments routine to try and debug it. So that was pretty handy. And it basically just was a quick way. So there's 3 main methods which allow you to, probably towards the end, you can get bookmarks from a file, you can get the body, which is the main text, you can get the footnotes, the headers, the annotations, which are the bubbles down the side, and that was what I really wanted, a quick Perl way of actually getting these annotations out of a Word file. So that was text extract Word. And people actually do say, can you update it for newer things? And I keep saying, what you mean, like the docx files, which are basically just zipped XML, so no. you can do those yourself.
So did you work from some specification of what the Word text would be like, or did you just have to rip open a Word file and figure out what was in there?
There was a transitional level to it. In practice, no, I never went back down to the original raw layer thing. And anybody who's worked with Word, Microsoft file formats, there's several layers to them. There's the OLE layer, and I was using OLE Storage Lite, which actually that just allows you to essentially multiplex multiple files within one big file. Build a file system within a file, if you like. Once you've got the data part of the Word file, then people have reverse engineered quite a lot of the layers separately for that. But about halfway through this work, Microsoft actually did come clean and actually publish the format. And then things started to move a lot more easily. They'd kept it proprietary to begin with, but there was a kind of date when they finally realized that maybe actually having the thing in a non-proprietary thing would be good for business. And it opened up a lot of the reliability, which we just weren't able to get before, when a lot of it was hidden. Particularly some of the subtleties to do with the way they do non-Latin 1 characters, because it's in chunks, and there's mixes of UCS2 and 8-bit stuff, and they have blocks, and they just mix them and then merge them back together. So it's a total mess as a file format. So that was fun to do. It was worth it because it actually did do a good job in getting the text out. That's mine.
Said the software reflects the structure of the organization used it. It's not surprising.
Yes.
For all those listening, this is how you get other people to do your talk for you.
All right. I'm gonna resort these to make it more interesting. Okay. So I did release a package while I was on the train. So the first, probably the most popular module that I deal with is HTTP Browser Detect. And all it is a user agent parser. I remember actually giving a lightning talk here years ago about how I'd written my own parser, and Adam Prime said, "Why don't you just use this?" And I said I had no idea that it existed. So I went and looked this up, and it hadn't had a release in like 8 years or something like that. So I took it over, I cleaned it up, I took care of all the RT tickets, and then a few years ago, Neil Bowers of CPANday fame wrote he writes a lot of blog articles comparing different kinds of modules, and he wrote one comparing user agent parsers. This one fared almost the worst out of all of them. So in terms of speed, but it actually is the best at detecting bots, and it's probably the most up to date about the user agent parsers. I actually get like a lot of pull requests for this, and there's one particular contributor who, when he sees an issue open up, like he'll fix it within a few minutes sometimes. So I actually got
pull requests for 2 different issues from today, so I actually had to do 2 releases. So it's actually not bad. I think it's not as slow as it once was. I have plans actually to replace the guts of it with a user agent parser that could be used by a whole bunch of different parsers. I want to call it user agent Uber agent. And I was talking to Neil Bowers about it, but it's just one of those things I haven't really had time for. But this is sort of, if you want to see if, actually we can just take a quick look at it, what the operating system is, or even sometimes like what language a person's using, which country, those things are sometimes embedded in the user agent string. And this is sort of this is usually a good enough way of figuring it out. The one problem with this is, like, I'll show you the version list here. So there, I guess it wasn't that bad. It had been 7 years between releases when I took it over. But if you go back to the first release,
Holy crap!
it goes back over 14 years old. This module. So, and it's actually, if you look at the internals, it's kind of fun. This is after me doing a bit of cleanup, but basically what it does is it just creates all these methods. Like anything you want to know, you just call Win7 to see if that's true, if it's Windows 7. And so it's got like a really cluttered sort of namespace. Like there's just tons and tons of methods. And then basically it just sort of performs these string tests on them, and just instead of doing a regex, it does like an index and make sure that it's not equal to -1 to see if it's true. And it makes some sort of naive assumptions about things. But what I did do when I took it over was I added a pilot test for it. So it's like I said, it's good enough. We use it at work. And, yeah, it sort of suits most of my needs for that stuff, and it's easy enough to patch. Mechanized cache is something that I also took over. The original author passed away, and then Andy Lester took it over. But there was sort of a big list of issues, and I emailed him one day. I said, "What are your plans for it?" He said, "I don't have any plans for it." And I said, I could take it over. And he said, "Sure, just let me know when you're ready." And then like a couple hours later, I had all the patches done. He gave me a maint that night, and then I got a new release of it out, and I've been maintaining it ever since. Now, the cool thing about mechanized cache is what it does is it caches your GET requests. So if you're trying to, a lot of times sometimes you want to fetch a page, you might want to manipulate the data in some way to extract it, and a lot of times you're just sort of, when you're testing, you're just running these requests over and over and over again. So mechanized cache will just go live for the first request, and then after that it'll just do cached GET requests. So something like this is actually really handy, especially if you're querying, say, the MetaCPAN API. If you're using MetaCPAN client, you can use a mechanized cached object, and so it'll cache all your GET requests. So it actually, there's a huge speed up. The default is to cache everything for 1 day using file cache, which is deprecated. So sort of recommend that you use Chi instead, and then which has like tons and tons of drivers to use, and then you can cache things for as long as you want it and in the manner that you want. So you could even cache them in memory if you want. So this is it's a nice way of accessing APIs or just doing any kind of like fetches. If you're going to work on the plane, you could get all the URLs that you're interested for, and then you'll still be able to work on them. Okay, HTML restrict is another one that's fairly popular, and we use this one on MetaCPAN because Tokuhiram had released like this Acme XSS or something like that, and then when you load it on MetaCPAN, it said, all your CPAN are belong to us or something. It had like a pop-up that showed up. So we decided you shouldn't be able to run arbitrary JavaScript on MetaCPAN, so we started using this. And essentially all it does is it parses your HTML and it strips away every single tag by default. So that's the name, restricted. So basically what you can do is give it a very specific list of tags that you want to allow and attributes for those tags, and then it'll just sort of leave you with those. The reason I wrote this was at a previous job, we had a form that you could post something to, and it would display it in an email message, and the boss he posted like a ton of JavaScript and stuff into it, and it just looked like garbage. Then we realized this is actually a serious problem that we have. So this solves that, I think, quite nicely, and I've gotten a bunch of pull requests for this as well to make it nice. So I think initially it used Moose, and then I got one to switch it over to Moo, and you can use regexes and stuff now as well. So it's yeah. So you can see you can do sort of quite complicated things where let's say you just want to allow YouTube iframes and things like that to remain in your source. So if you do have untrusted input that you want to filter, then I highly recommend this. There may be faster ways of doing this, but this is pretty solid.
That deals with the body tables, HTML.
Yeah, exactly. So, and because it's restrictive, if there's some new tag that comes out in the future, you don't have to know about it. This is something that I did just for fun. It's Acme Odometer. It lets you just create those little odometer text counters from way back when you were using GeoCities or something like that.
Not like you have experience with that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it is some code I had lying around for a while, so I thought I'd bundle it up. Now this LWB console logger is essentially, Matt had talked about his, what was the module called, the console logger? Black middleware console logger, which he stole from Catalyst. I stole this from Matt. And essentially what it does
you can't
is...
talk about this. This is your lightning talk.
Oh, well, we'll just go for briefly.
Well, just go quicker then.
Yeah. Essentially what you do is if you... so I had a problem at work where I was trying to debug an app that wouldn't run on a VM, so it would only run on these containers, which don't run locally. It was a mod Perl application, and we were using test www mechanized to run through like all these scenarios for purchases and stuff like that. I had to like, what was going on underneath? And I was constantly putting in all these print statements, and it was just driving me batty. And then I realized there are things in LWP that you can hook into. Like you can add these handlers for response done and request send. And so I just hooked into them, and then I had spoken with Matt about this earlier, and then I realized that there might be a prettier way to lay this out. So essentially, this kind of does what the same sorts of things as Matt's module does, but it does it for your own user agent. Now, the cool thing about this is if you're using a module which allows you to provide your own user agent, say like Meta CPAN client, or say if Dave's currency exchange module would allow you to provide your own user agent, you could provide your own like this, and then you could actually get all the console output. You don't need a module like this to do this. You could use, I guess, Wireshark. You could set up your own proxy, but this is just way easier. And you can even use it with HTTP Tiny through like a hack that Cantanel put together. So that's kind of cool. So if you just want to know what's going on under hood, that's good. Oops. So this what's going on here? This distiller plugin prepan. If you've talked about a module on prepan, you can put this in your dzil config, and then it'll just link to your prepan page so people can discuss it. Prepan is a good place. Like if you're thinking of publishing a Perl module, you can post something on prepan and people can discuss it and tell you it's a terrible idea and all that kind of thing. I use code tidyall a lot, and so I just wrote a couple quick plugins for it. This one it enforces unique lines in any of your files. So what you do with code tidyall is essentially it's like you can use like linters and formatters and all this kind of stuff, and it aggregates everything. So you can say, take all my .pm files and run Perl tidy on them. Take my JavaScript files and run JS Beautify on them, and this kind of thing. And so for me, if you write a git ignore file, I just hate seeing the same thing in there twice. So if you add this plugin, it will just make sure that you only have unique lines in it. And then there's also a sorting plugin that tidyall has, but I don't like the way it sorts. I like sort naturally so that so you don't get, say, all your lowercase words first and then your uppercase ones. This will put it in like dictionary sort order, which I like, especially for git ignore and things like that too. Or if you have a really simple sort of CPAN file that just requires the module names, then you can make sure that with the combination of these two, that all the lines are unique and sorted, so you don't have duplicates and things like that. So business CAGST was just, there was another module online that allowed you to look up tax rate, but it was out of date, so I just created my own. This URI parse search string more. It's you got some crazy setup. It basically, like, if you're going through your log files and you have refers, it will parse the refers and then just give you the search term that the user entered. And there are some cases where, like, say for Yahoo Answers or something like that, where you actually have to go to the page, fetch the page, and then extract the request out of the title. So this will do that as well. So it just kind of makes it easy to figure out how people got your site. I took over maintenance of a wrapper for the FreshBooks API. HTTP Cookie Monster is actually one that's kind of handy. If you ever try to manipulate the LWP cookie jar, it's a total pain. And there's like 11 positional parameters that you need for this one callback. Like it's just nuts. So this basically,
Positional?
yeah, right here. Like that's how you would set a cookie, right? Like why? So this lets you like actually like say iterate over all the cookies in your cookie jar and gives you OO access to them. So I find it quite handy. I actually like using it in tests too if you want to make sure that like a session cookie's been set or something like that. Archive Any was a module that needed a one-line fix that wasn't being applied, so I got maint on that. Business PayPal API needed a one-line fix, so I got that as well. Flag. Yeah. There's also this Plaque middleware no deflate. So if you're gzipping your content, you can't use the Plaque debug panels because what they do is they perform regex on your code and they're expecting certain things to be there. So basically, this just sets a header that says you don't want any deflated content. That's all it does. Just go to the source here. It was almost embarrassing to upload it, but this is all it does. Yeah, I think so. It's a little bit verbose, but and then that's essentially it. Then I'd written this this little app that basically can tell you if your MySQL slaves are behaving. And yeah, that's it for me.
Cool. Do you dare? I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to do all of them.
Okay.
Because I still need you to do it.
Right. Yeah.
Before you get started, question generally for the CPANday, that I've seen descriptions that when you go from code you wrote yourself to code you wrote for use in the installation to code you use for the public and so on, each step involves a factor of about 3 times as much work. And you found that with doing that CPAN, or is it?
Yeah, well, it's more work for sure, but it's just the same way that if you come to my house and I'll clean it first, right? So there's certain things I'm okay with.
What a foolish one.
Yeah. But there's certain things before I put it out there that I want to find out. But with stuff like Distilla, it's actually.
Yeah, I kind of feel that like I have like probably like a dozen things on my GitHub that I haven't released to CPAN, and I just don't like to release to CPAN if I don't have tests and documentation and things of this nature, right? It's in some ways it's good. It's like a little bit of an impetus to actually improve your module to the level where you're actually proud of it in some sense. That's what I think.
Plus, the first module isn't very hard, but once you've done that, it makes sense.
You create a bit used to it, it's actually quite easy. But say, yeah, first module, then actually.
Scariest thing for me was the tests. Because I've written tests, but not exhaustive tests, and I want to have at least reasonable coverage before I put it on CPAN so I wasn't mocked.
Well, I think now, over time, you realize how bad other people's testing is, and sometimes you see something standard. There's quite a few modules out there with no tests at all.
True.
I'm seeing that. That's the news.
That's one of the other factors that deter the public comparison code out there immediately with mocking love.
You never come across any mocking one. I think you're more likely to get constructive suggestions. I suppose it could happen, right? I haven't seen it.
I've thus had complete and utter disinterest from all parties.
Yeah. Speaking of testing, this is one of my first modules I released there. It's there's a kind of a somewhat obscure Unix feature where if you have 2 completely separate processes, you can use a Unix socket to pass file descriptors between them, right? So you have a socket open in one of them. You can actually pass that over SCM rights, it's like basically metadata that you can pass over a Unix socket. Yeah, and it used the n-event framework, so it's portable to pretty much any event system you want. But yeah, the reason why I want to talk about this one is that basically it tries to make it portable between all the various interfaces, historical and modern, to how to do this. But really what I want to talk about is that I feel like it's not as well as just creating tests, it's also important to document why the test was written, right? So, for example, every single test I include with this distribution, I have a little, and I do this try to do this with most of my modules if possible, or several of them at least, is just describe what the test is actually for, right? So, like, there's one test that's bidirectional. It assumes that, if you have this channel open, you can pass it both directions, right? Also, there's a test that tries to tickle the blocking aspect of it to see if it actually does block. I mean, it's not supposed to block, right? It's supposed to, be completely asynchronous interface that's file descriptor passing, right? And also, if you pass two like back to back, they should, get passed in the same order they were. They get received in the same order they were sent, right? And it's also forking should preserve blocking status. And if you have a channel, you can pass that channel over another channel. And anyway, I just think it's good. It's really important to describe why you're testing things too, right? Like, you can just write a test and like have a whole bunch of junk and it does stuff, and yeah, it exercises it, but it's actually really enforcing like some sort of assumption that you've come across, right? That's what I think is one thing that's really crucial with the CPAN module and testing in general. Really, is like it's not enough to test something; you have to know why you're testing it and what assumptions you're trying to prove, right? And one of my probably most popular modules is session token. It's really all it is it's like the simplest thing. There's a million modules to do on CPAN. It's basically just get me a random string, right? Like, just get me something completely random and unpredictable, right? And when I first was doing this, I checked out like a dozen modules, and all of them had very obvious to me deficiencies, right? The most common was that they would just use like Perl's rand or something, which is not actually designed to be cryptographically secure at all. It's very predictable, in fact, right? It's on Linux. I checked; it's seeded with 32 bits, right? So basically, you could make like an almost in-memory now hash table, get a little sequence of tokens, do a reverse lookup, and recover the seed, and then therefore predict every subsequent token, right? So session token is designed to be cryptographically secure. Also, it's designed to be very efficient too, right? And we were talking earlier about Neil Bowers, and he does a lot of really cool stuff on CPAN about CPAN things. And yeah, one of them is he creates like these reviews of all these different modules, right? And yeah, he reviewed dozens of these, many of these modules to do the random generation or whatever, right? And he had a bunch of criteria. The one that session token did the best on was the benchmarking here, right? So you can see session token is 10 times faster than one of the previous ones, right? And yeah, it has a lot less waste. It does things a lot more efficiently, and you can read the docs if you want, right, to understand why. Okay. So one of the negatives are that you can't have variable length tokens, right? Like, a lot of them let you get tokens between 8 and 10 characters long or whatever, right? However, he filed a Git or like a RT issue, a release bug about it, and I kind of, in my opinion, wrote this little section of the docs to explain why that's a bad idea and you shouldn't do that, right? Like, one of the things is that if you have variable length tokens and you put that over an encrypted channel, then by looking at the length of that encrypted data, it can potentially leak information about the token, right? It can leak several bits of the token because you can, sometimes infer how long the plain text is by looking at how long the ciphertext is, right? So, in my opinion, yeah, that's one of the reasons that session token has exactly. It always has fixed. It always creates fixed length tokens, right?
Do you want to go back to that breakdown?
Yeah.
What's data simple password doing?
I have no idea. I have no idea. Yeah, I don't know that. But yeah, yes, it's yeah, and
more interesting, people doing on the NSA.
yeah, who knows? Who knows? Yeah. How do you page up in this? Okay, never mind.
It actually makes a phone call to my 2-year-old, and you just listen to her.
Yeah. Yeah. one of the other things is that it allows you to do arbitrary size alphabets, right? So like, instead of doing base 64, you can have base whatever, right? Where did this go? And yeah, basically it avoids mod bias, right? Like if you do, this is one of the other problems I found with almost all the other modules that do this, right? Is to generate a character, they'll often like take, like say they want to generate like, base 26, right? Like every letter, right? What they'll do is they'll generate, they'll get, a 32-bit value and they'll mod that by 26, right? And then take that value as the output, right? Well, as you can read the documentation here, that introduces something called mod bias, right? So in other words, some tokens will be more predictable than other tokens, right? So yeah, you can you read the docs of session token, right? In my opinion, it's comprehensively documented, and I think that's another really important thing about modules to put up in CPAN, right? If you can document them, then more people will like them, and more people use them and understand them, and it'll be just generally better. Another really important thing, in my opinion, about CPAN modules, if you're going to release them, is you can put into the metadata things like, for example, the GitHub, like the source repository locations, right? So, for example, I personally want all my bugs to be filed on GitHub, right? Because as opposed to the Perl release tracker, RT. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I prefer GitHub over rt.perl.org. Not because I don't like the RT one, but it's just that, well, okay. It has some issues.
Sorry,
But the main reason I don't like it is because I do stuff in other languages than Perl, right? And to me, it makes a lot more sense to have one centralized location for all my stuff to come into, right? So I don't want to have to like one for Perl and one for like Lisp and one for C. It's like everything, if you just come to me in one place, it makes stuff so much easier. Exactly, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
It's really handy to have it integrated with code because you can just do commits and result X.
Exactly.
Result understanding, get codes for you. So it's just so sweet.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so that's session token. If you ever just need random values, you should check it out. There's lots of stuff. Let me just talk about one other sort of system I made. Does everyone know about the alien hierarchy? Basically what it is it's this hierarchy of modules that the only purpose of these modules is to go and somehow install a third-party package, right? So if you have alien some module, or alien some software distribution, usually what that will do when you install it is it will somehow or another try to ensure that you have some distribution installed, right? So for example, I released this one called Alien OpenVC Diff, and there's this Google module that does binary delta encoding of things, right? And I'll explain what that is in a second. But basically, really what it does is, I think I actually include the C source code to it in this module, and when you install it, it will compile it and install it, in your auto directory of your Perl dist, right? So it's there, and other Perl modules can use it, right? Basically, the nice thing about this is that any other module that wants to use this OpenVCDiff library can just depend on Alien OpenVCDiff. And Alien OpenVCDiff will go worry about all the compiling it for your system and all these other things, right? It actually uses Alien Base, which is the sort of a base class that handles a whole bunch of the really common things. Like for example, if you already have OpenVCDiff installed, Alien Base will detect that and it'll be like, oh, no problem, I'm going to use the system version of OpenVCDiff as opposed to compiling my own new one, right? However, if you don't, it can for example, go to apt-get, or if you're on a Debian system, it'll try and apt-get it for you. Otherwise, it'll fall back to using the included source version, right? So it's just if you want to make sure that some third-party package is installed in a system, Alien modules are the way to do it, right? So what actually uses, why did I release this Alien OpenVCDiff thing in the first place? Well, it's so I can have this VCDiff, OpenVCDiff module, right? And it's it essentially is basically a driver to another module I'll talk about in a second. But you can see how it depends on Alien OpenVCDiff here, right? And basically it does the VCDiff functionality. And all it needs to do is just depend on Alien OpenVCDiff, which will actually install that module for you, right? Or install OpenVCDiff for you somehow or another, right? Okay, so what the heck is VCDiff? So VCDiff is basically diff and patch for binary data, right? So how if you have textual data, like line-based data, there's those two utilities, diff and patch. patch is written by Larry Wall originally, FYI. But basically, yeah, it's if you have two different like source files as a common example, but any line-based textual file will work. You pass those two files to the diff command, obviously, and it it returns like this diff or a patch, which then you can later on apply with the patch command to turn the original one to the target one, right? In this case, I'm calling them source and target. Basically, VCDiff is an RFC standard, RFC 3284, whatever. What is it? Option to open new? Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah. So it's an RFC, whatever. It's pretty neat. It has basically the way it works is it treats the source and target as sort of this conceptually concatenated big string of bytes, right? And when it's processing, it has these certain like little assembly commands, right? Like its output, its diff is basically like these little assembly commands where it can say, copy 400 bytes from offset 6, and then copy 9,000 bytes from offset 1,000, and then insert this other block, whatever. Basically, the idea is if you have a big binary file and you're like creating little changes, like inserting things or deleting things and so on, the VCDiffs can be really small and just represent the actual conceptual, like the actual like differences between them, right? VCDiff essentially tries to be like the quote unquote DBI of VCDiff libraries, right? So it tries to interface with all like the open source or available VCDiff libraries, all the ones that implement the RFC, right? So really simple to use. It actually doesn't even export. It has two functions that you can use, diff and patch, right? Basically, you pass diff two big binary strings, right? And of course, text is, you could pass a text too if you wanted, right? There's nothing inherent about binary. It takes anything. And it'll compute and create this other little diff, right? This delta, it's called. And theoretically, that's a lot smaller than the source, right? In theory, it's just the differences between the source and the target, right? And for example, if you're deleting like 1 million bytes from source, let's say, then the diff will be like ultra small, right? All it is one like command, right? Like copy everything up before where you deleted, and then copy everything after from where you deleted, right? So the diffs conceptually can often be really small, right? So yeah, there's diff and patch, and yeah, here you go. It's the DBI VCDiff implementations, right? Basically, there's two backends right now. There's the Open VCDiff, which I told you about, and then there's the XDelta3, which is another one. And they have sort of different properties and are preferential in certain areas. But yeah, usually you just use VCDiff and allow whichever one is installed to be run. That's another thing that I think is really important about CPAN modules, is not enforcing like policy on users, right? If you can make it generic and just work in any way, it's so much more useful, right? Like think about how useful DBI is, right? One of the reasons, in my opinion, why it's so useful is because you can write code that doesn't even care about what backend database is there at all, right? All it does is depend on DBI, right? And that way someone can swap out Postgres for DB2 for whatever, right? There's a lot of there's many caveats to what I just said. That's true. But conceptually, like, could you imagine if you had to write like DBD MySQL code directly and then port that to something for Postgres? Like, oh my god, right?
PHP.
Yeah, exactly. So DBI is awesome, and generic interfaces are awesome, right? VCDiff doesn't try and enforce policy on it, right? You can just use VCDiff, and whatever is installed by the user will be the one that's used, right? Yeah. The other kind of cool thing is that VCDiff supports like a streaming interface, right? Like I showed you how diff returns a string. Well, you can also pass it a file handle, right? And if the backend supports it, it will start outputting the diff before it has even completely processed the input files, right? And yeah, it's fully streaming both on like the diff and the patch level if you want it to be, right? And yeah, it also works pretty well with memory mapped inputs. And then yeah, here it explains the testing, right? So yeah, basically yeah, there's just some basic tests that verify it works, and there's also the quote unquote streaming test, which actually tried to like do every combination of inputs, right? So you can see here the first one is like a streaming input A and a streaming input B to memory mapped output, right? Like that's if you want a diff file A and you have like a stream to the file. like a file handle open for file A, and then you also have a file handle open for file B, and then you want to return a string into memory, right? So test that combination, right? And then basically test, okay, well, let's say I have a string and a file handle, or sorry, yeah, a string, which is the memory, and a file handle, which is the streaming one, and return a string, right? It does basically every combination of that, just to make sure that the backends can actually do that, right? And then it also has the cross-compat test, right, where for every one of these streaming tests, it basically loops over all the backends that are known and tries to make sure that they're compatible at the VC-diff level, right? So it creates a diff, it does a diff of a bunch of inputs and outputs, and for every single one of those, uses different combination of backends and make sure that it still decodes, right? And that ensures that if you create a diff with open VC-diff, X-Delta3 is able to apply the patch properly, and vice versa, and so on, right? VC-diff VRC has a whole bunch of extensions and whatever, like a whole bunch of extra things it can add, but VC-diff, as much as possible, tries to make sure that the output is 100% RFC compatible, the RFC328, whatever it is, 84. And yeah, that's VC-diff, and yeah, it's a collection of modules there. But anyway, yeah, I think just talk real quick about IO vector, because this is kind of another interesting thing, in my opinion. So CPAN testers, awesome, 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 right? What they do is basically every time you upload a package to CPAN, CPAN testers downloads it and tries to run it on many, many different versions of Perl and also operating systems and so on. And they'll send you a report and email if something breaks. And you can also look at the CPAN tester matrix, which shows you every combination of Perl and operating system and also your distributions to see which are failing. IO vectored is a really simple module. It basically tries to use the Unix vectored IO routines, right? Like basically, Unix provides read and write, which basically you give it like a block of memory, and it'll read that. It'll read from a file handle into that block of memory, or if you call write, it will write from that block of memory into a file handle, right? However, there's a little bit of overhead every time you call read and write, right? So if you have a bunch of blocks of memory in various different places in your memory address space, Unix also provides vectored IO system calls called write-v and read-v, where you can pass this vector of memory blocks into them, right? And then it does one system call, and it copies from the first chunk of memory and the second chunk of memory and the third chunk of memory in one single system call, right? And that avoids it avoids a fair amount of system call overhead, right? And also, importantly, it does it atomically, right? Like if you have a bunch of blocks of memory and you call write on the first block and then write on the second block and then write on the third block, well, if something in some other process calls write in between those two writes, it might get intermingled into that block of memory, right? Write-v does it atomically, right? And it does it so that you don't have to allocate another huge block of memory and then copy a little block into here, little block into here, little block into here, and then call write. It's basically a really efficient way to write little chunks of memory in one shot, right? Really common example is if you're writing an HTTP response, right? Usually you have a headers in one block of memory that you've generated, and you want to write the file data that's either in a memory mapped I/O or whatever, right? The naive way to do it is to call write on the headers and then call write on the body. Well, there's a few problems with that, right? Number one is the performance overhead I talked about the system call overhead. However, another really important usage of vectored I/O is that will actually send too many packets, right? Like in most cases, if you call write on the headers, the operating system, as soon as it gets that right, will send a packet over the internet containing those headers, right? And then, as soon as that's happening, well, the system call returns, and you go on and call write on the body content. Well, guess what? That's going to have to get sent in a separate packet, right? So if you use vector I/O, because it does it atomically, the operating system knows, oh, okay, well, I'm going to write the headers, and I'm also going to write the start of this file, and I can do it in one packet and send it, right? So that way you have less bandwidth and better latency, right? Anyway, IO vectored is a Perl interface to your vectored IO system calls on Unix, right? And it's pretty simple. It's essentially just implements the same as sysread and syswrite. It just exports syswrite-v and sysread-v. Other than that, it essentially works. Yeah, so the reason why I want to talk about this is in Perl 5.20, they added this new optimization called copy on write, and the CPAN testers people wrote to me, and they actually followed a GitHub issue in my project here, and they're like, 5.19.1 pre-release or whatever is going to break. It seems to be broken with your module, right? Or your module doesn't work there. And I was like, that's pretty weird. They're not doing anything that unusual or whatever. So I was a little bit stumped, and I didn't really know what the heck is going on here. So they filed the issue, and I was a little bit stumped, and tried to figure out what was going on.
Closed? Zero closed.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, thanks, yeah. Cool. Wait. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. All right, I suck at the internet, yeah. Yeah, so it fails with this, right? So yeah, instead of like, doing this entire output there, like it was supposed to like write, like hello suite and then world and then whatever is like separate blocks. It got overwritten into these one things there, right? So yeah, Andreas Koenig, who we were talking about earlier, he's the guy, remember, that uploaded the first module to CPAN ever. He's like, yo, check this thing out. I've tracked down this commit. And then at YAPC there, I was like, it finally dawned on me after talking to these people, this new optimization they added. So I actually looked into it and added this patch, right? And essentially the problem was that if you're going to write into a scalar, as of Perl 5.20, you should always use svpv force to get the pointer to that memory, right? And the problem is if you just do the regular svpv, is that there might be other scalars that actually share that same memory due to this new copy and write optimization, right? So if you're ever going to write into a scalar's memory with XS code, you should always use svpv force, which promotes it to, like, it actually does the copying, right? Instead of just like blindly writing to memory like I was doing, it checked to see if there is any, like a reference count above 1. In other words, there's multiple scalars sharing this memory. Then it will actually do the copying and then write into the new memory, leaving the old memory intact, right? So that was the bug that CPAN tester discovered. But anyway, yeah, I really like CPAN testers and CPAN in general, and yeah, there's a bunch of other modules, but yeah, I'll talk about some of them on like lightning talks and so on too. So cheers.
So I don't know much about CPAN testers, but is it like an automated thing?
Yep.
That just keeps running? So it found the issue with your code. Did it open the issue automatically?
No.
It looked like that follow-up was obviously actually.
Yeah. So it won't open a GitHub or an RT issue for you automatically. It'll send you an email and like update the testers page for you. I mean, I can show you that test page actually.
I mean, like, how did these guys take that out?
So the way this came up,
Awesome.
yeah, it is awesome. They were actually doing like the 5.20 release, and they basically, before they do a major Perl release, they check to see everything that CPAN is Perl, right?
Okay.
And then they email a bunch of people, like try to find the problem and fix the things and so on.
Is this like all of them, or people who are doing stuff with XS?
In this case, it was basically just XS modules that broke. Yeah, you have to be doing something kind of crazy with XS, like I do with my old record, for this to come up. But yeah.
I'm hoping that we found a bug in Perl's copy on write
Well,
optimization and
so
made them change.
yeah, no. If I was faster, I would have. But actually, file map Leon Timmermans, he discovered a bug with this earlier too. Yeah. Although that same bug would have affected file vector. I just didn't know what the heck was going on when I first got this issue, so I put it off until the YAPC basically.
That's
But-
probably why they were looking so closely in case it was actually.
Oh, for sure, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So this is kind of like the one of the matrix interfaces kind of things. Oop. As you can see, it shows the actual Perl releases as the rows, and then the columns are different operating systems, right? They can show you, green means all these passed, which looks like I'm doing pretty good. Okay, cool. Yeah, and then it shows you the results of individual runs, and I'm like, okay, why the heck does this one fail? That's odd. So I'm going to go in there, and this is basically the output of if you do like make you know, like Perl makefile, PL make, whatever. So what went on? What went wrong here?
You can
Yeah.
set up your own system to contribute these as well. So write them to shell CPAN, so when you install modules, if it doesn't install it automatically reports, it gets called. It's part of crowdsourced too.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you all for falling prey to my incredible plan to not do a talk by having you all do talks. So I mentioned this the last time I did a talk, but no one was here for that talk, so you get this again. My presentation was actually written, well, the software here is called Reveal.js. It's the knit that provides this lovely little interface here. I hate writing slides, and I especially hate slide software. However, this whole presentation is written in where are we here? See, Dropbox slides. It is actually written in Markdown, and it is currently running. Nope, where are we here? Here we are. No, we're not. I lied. It's running somewhere. Basically, what I did is I installed app reveal-up, which basically says, give me a markdown file with some simple separators, and I will give you a slideshow themed and everything, which I think is awesome, and I love it. So if you also hate writing slides, but you're okay writing a bit of markdown, here you go.
Is there something to export it to like a format you can upload on SlideShare?
You can actually print this to PDF. If you do, I haven't actually done it before, but I was reading about it. File, print.
You should just go to save the source to HTML, like it's right there. It's just sorry, right. You just save the HTML source to this page, and it should just be the same.
Oh yeah, I can do that too.
Oh.
You can save it that way, but
Yeah, just do the resource actually. It's not possible to reuse. It's pretty easy to do. It's just kind of.
yeah. Well, no, it's cheating. They rolled it into a thing. But there is a way to print this out to slides. I'd have to look it up on Reveal Docs. But yeah, you can actually generate it. But I hate fucking around with raw HTML and slideshows because if I fuck up one thing, I'm more concerned with the content. And if I can write that in Markdown, yay! So thank you very much. We'll see you all next month. Everyone that hasn't offered to do a talk, I have forced you.
Matt can do one remote.
You're already on the list.
I am, but Matt said he can do one
You're going to do one remotely. You're going to have to get a laptop. And Google Hangouts.
Actually, that's a good point. I shouldn't have to say that.
Well,
Maybe I can do this.
we'll finish.
Sorry, just say something.
No.
Well,
Go ahead.
if you've been reading the mailing list, you probably already noticed that we presented, because Simon will carry through to global knowledge, Scott was responsible for us having a foundation for years. And because they're now changing locations, they want to do that, we presented him with a pen presentation, pen set. So thank you. Suitably engraved as a thank you. I gave it to him last week, and unless he's excused with acting, he's very tough. The one thing is that Mike Stock is now on the hook for a fair amount of money. If everybody else looks around, possibly $5 or $10, that I think would be much fairer.
Yeah, I think it was $160 or something.
Yeah.
He said to give it. I asked him. He said to give money to Dave.
Yes, I've spent $225 on Meetup.com in the last year and a bit. So any cost to defray that would be nice too.
You did not spend that.
All right, and thank you, Perlmongers. Toronto Perlmongers would like to thank Global Knowledge, which is their current name from several other names they've been through. They have been, one thing meetup groups need is, wow, I'm getting money thrown at me. This is awesome.
I got a severance package with it.
One thing that so many meetup groups don't have is a reliable meeting space. And when you have a reliable meeting space, it makes all the difference in the world. Logistics become so much simpler. So thank you very much to Global Knowledge for all their years of support. I mean, what is it, like 15 years?
Yeah, it's a good space.
Yeah.
As far back as living memory serves.
Well, for some of our co-ops, definitely. All right.
Did we record?
Cheers.